It started as an ordinary morning until I saw smoke curling up from my driveway. My heart stopped. Someone had set fire to my luxury car cover, and I knew exactly who was behind it. Karen's son. But this wasn't just a random act of vandalism. This was personal, fueled by weeks of petty disputes, HOA rules twisted against me, and a neighbor's obsession with control. As the flames died down, sirens approached, and to my shock, both of them ended up facing the officers together. How did a small neighborhood feud spiral into this explosive confrontation? And what happened next would leave everyone stunned. It was a quiet, sunlit street, the kind you see in magazines. Manicured lawns, freshly painted houses, and the low hum of everyday suburban life. My family had moved here years ago, drawn by the sense of safety, community, and predictability that seemed to come with the neatly lined homes. Mornings were simple pleasures. Coffee on the porch, kids laughing in the yard, and neighbors waving as they walked their dogs. Life felt calm, normal, and honestly, perfect. But in this picture-perfect neighborhood, there was one person who seemed to take rules personally. Karen, a neighbor just a few doors down, was notorious for her rigid enforcement of every HOA guideline. At first, her behavior seemed trivial. Comments about lawn height, reminders about parking, or notes about paint colors. But over time, it became clear that she treated these rules like weapons. At first, we tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a quirk. Yet subtle signs kept appearing. A note tucked under the door about improperly parked vehicles. A casual comment about the wrong type of flowers in our yard. Even a random call to the HOA asking if our mailbox was up to standard. Each incident was small, almost laughable on its own, but together they hinted at something more sinister. We didn't realize that every harmless choice we made, parking a car, trimming a bush, or enjoying a quiet evening on the porch, was being watched and judged. Karen's obsession with control was the calm before a storm, one that would soon escalate far beyond what any of us could have imagined. It was a quiet, sunlit street lined with manicured lawns, white picket fences, and the familiar hum of suburban life. I had moved here years ago, drawn by the sense of community and the promise of peace. Our mornings were filled with coffee on the porch, kids laughing in the yard, and neighbors greeting each other with a wave. Life felt safe, predictable, and normal. But beneath the polished exterior of this neighborhood, tensions simmered. Karen, the neighbor a few houses down, was known for her rigid adherence to HOA rules and her relentless need to control everything, down to who parked where and how flowers were trimmed. At first, it was easy to brush off her comments or her constant scrutiny, but I noticed subtle things. A lawnmower left slightly askew, a car parked too long on the street, a note tucked under the door about community standards. Small, almost laughable rules, but rules that in Karen's hands could turn into weapons. We thought we knew what our peaceful neighborhood meant, but soon every choice we made, every car parked or hedge trimmed, would be scrutinized, twisted, and used against us. Little did we know that what seemed like petty interference was only the calm before a storm, a spark that would ignite a conflict far bigger than any of us could have imagined. It started subtly, almost innocently, but soon every day brought a new frustration. Karen didn't just complain about a crooked mailbox or a slightly overgrown hedge anymore. She weaponized every minor HOA regulation she could find. A letter arrived first, polite on the surface but menacing underneath. Vehicle covers are not permitted in the driveway. Then came fines, small at first, then stacking week by week. Each notice felt like a personal attack, as if every inch of our property, every decision was under surveillance. I tried to reason with her, thinking a simple conversation could ease the tension, but Karen had mastered a different game. She pitted rules against common sense. She complained about the color of my garden ornaments, the way my trash bins were positioned, and even the time my children played outside. It wasn't about aesthetics, it was about control. Then came the parking incidents. One afternoon, I returned from work to find another note pinned to my windshield, warning me that my car was violating HOA standards. I parked legally, but apparently that didn't matter. Hours later, I saw Karen's son sneering from across the street, smirking as if daring me to react. That moment felt insignificant, but it was a spark, one that would eventually ignite a series of events spiraling completely out of control. The harassment escalated. Surveillance cameras mysteriously appeared on the street, capturing every move in our driveway. Calls were made to the HOA questioning our every action, and neighbors whispered behind closed doors, feeding into the paranoia. Each day felt like a test of patience, a tug-of-war between reason and obsession. Then, one night, I came home late and noticed a flicker of orange by the driveway. My stomach dropped. The car cover was on fire. My hands trembled as I grabbed the hose, putting out the flames, but the damage was done. The smoke had drawn attention, and within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. The very people behind this act, Karen and her son, were now facing law enforcement. The tension that had been simmering for weeks had finally exploded, and the neighborhood watched in disbelief. But even as the officers arrived, the story wasn't over. Every interaction, every accusation, every petty retaliation had set the stage for a confrontation more dramatic than anyone could have predicted. And while the fire was put out, the emotional sparks between us and Karen us were far from extinguished. Weeks of mounting tension, petty fines, and escalating disputes had all led to this boiling point. I stood in my driveway, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the street. Karen's car rolled up first, glinting in the sun, followed closely by her son. Their faces were unreadable, or maybe full of that smug confidence only someone convinced of their own righteousness can muster. I could feel the weight of every petty complaint, every note about the improper parking, every thinly veiled threat she had sent my way over the past month. Today, it all came to a head. Karen stepped out, her eyes scanning the driveway as if it were a battlefield she was already winning. Her son lingered near the car, arms crossed, a smirk on his face. But the smirk didn't last long. In my hand, I held a folder packed with documented evidence, photos of their repeated violations, copies of every HOA letter, timestamps showing when their so-called complaints were submitted, and even footage from the security cameras I'd installed after the first hint of harassment. I took a deep breath. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about finally drawing a line. "I have everything here," I said, voice steady but carrying the anger and exhaustion of weeks of torment. "Every complaint you filed, every fine you pushed, every interference you attempted, there's a record. And the fire? The authorities have been notified." Karen's face shifted. For a moment, her confidence wavered. Her eyes darted to her son, who suddenly seemed smaller, less certain. That fire, set on my car cover, was supposed to intimidate, to scare me into submission, but instead it had become the catalyst for turning the tables. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder. The officers were on their way, summoned after I filed an official report and provided indisputable evidence of the vandalism. The tension on the street was palpable. Neighbors peeked from behind their curtains, whispering to one another. It felt like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see how this confrontation would unfold. Karen opened her mouth to argue, to dismiss my claims, but I held up the evidence. I could see the hesitation flicker across her face. This was no longer about opinion or he said, she said. It was facts, laid bare, impossible to twist or deny. When the officers arrived, the scene intensified. They moved with quiet authority, assessing the situation with professional detachment. But their expressions confirmed what I had suspected. The balance of power had shifted. Karen's son, who had gleefully set fire to my car cover, froze the moment he saw the officers. Statements were exchanged, questions were asked. Every violation I had documented was reviewed, and with each passing minute, Karen's carefully constructed aura of control crumbled. Her face, once so confident, now showed a mixture of panic and disbelief. The neighborhood's notorious enforcer of HOA rules, the woman who had weaponized every petty regulation, was exposed. Every harsh word, every intrusive complaint, every attempt to make my life miserable, all of it was on record. Her son's involvement in the fire added fuel to the fire, literally and figuratively, and the officers were taking no chances. In those moments, I felt a complex swirl of emotions: relief, vindication, anger, and an almost overwhelming sense of triumph. All the weeks of frustration, sleepless nights, and careful documentation had culminated in this turning point. Justice, delayed but undeniable, was finally here. Karen had underestimated the power of preparation, the strength of persistence, and the resilience of someone pushed too far. The day after the confrontation, the neighborhood felt different. The usual hum of daily life continued, but there was a subtle shift in the air, a mixture of relief, curiosity, and cautious optimism. Karen and her son were no longer looming figures of authority or fear. Their presence was diminished, almost fragile. What had once been a source of constant tension had been confronted head-on, and the consequences were now undeniable. The street, once a stage for her obsessive enforcement of rules, was quiet in a way that felt earned, a silence that carried the weight of justice. For us, the immediate relief was profound. No more threatening notes, no more petty fines, no more intrusive calls or passive-aggressive complaints. The HOA, now fully aware of Karen's overreach, had been forced to reevaluate their policies and her role in enforcing them. Several members of the board privately admitted that her actions had gone too far, that her personal vendettas had blurred the lines of legitimate oversight. It was a victory not only for our family, but for the integrity of the community itself. But the impact extended beyond the simple restoration of peace. In the days that followed, neighbors began to approach us differently. Some apologized for previously siding with Karen, admitting they had felt intimidated by her power and influence. Others shared their own stories of petty harassment, revealing that the fire and the confrontation had inspired them to stand up for themselves as well. It was as though a dam had broken. Years of pent-up frustrations and whispered grievances finally found a voice. I took time to reflect on the weeks leading up to the climax. Every small step, documenting violations, installing security cameras, gathering evidence, remaining calm under provocation, had led to this moment. The ordeal had been exhausting, emotionally draining, and at times terrifying, but it had also reinforced a lesson about resilience and strategy. In neighborhoods ruled by obsession and petty power, preparation and patience are just as important as courage. One cannot confront tyranny with rashness alone. It requires a careful, calculated approach. Meanwhile, Karen's own consequences were unavoidable. The HOA issued formal warnings, removed her from any positions of influence, and implemented stricter policies to prevent a single resident from abusing the rules in the future. Her son faced legal repercussions for the fire incident, including restitution and mandated community service. While no one wished for prolonged punishment, it was undeniable that accountability had finally caught up with them. The balance had shifted, not just temporarily, but in a way that ensured similar abuses would be far less likely in the future. Life slowly returned to a new normal, but the lessons lingered. Our family resumed our routines. Morning coffee on the porch, kids playing in the yard, friendly greetings exchanged with neighbors, but with a heightened sense of awareness and caution. The street itself felt safer, more cooperative, and more genuine. People recognized that while rules are meant to guide, they should never be weaponized against others. Respect, empathy, and communication became the cornerstones of interactions that had once been dominated by fear and intimidation. Emotionally, the journey left its mark. There was relief, of course, but also a lingering awareness of how quickly ordinary life can be disrupted by obsessive behavior. Every interaction with Karen and her son had been a reminder that small disputes, when left unchecked, can escalate into dangerous or destructive situations. Yet the resolution proved that vigilance, documentation, and a calm but determined approach could neutralize even the most relentless adversaries. In conversations with neighbors over the following weeks, I realized that our story had become something of a cautionary tale. New residents asked about the incident, curious how such an escalation had been possible. Longtime neighbors reflected on the subtle signs they had ignored, the first letters, the early fines, the initial notes tucked under doors. We shared advice. Don't wait for conflicts to escalate unchecked. Pay attention to early warning signs. Keep detailed records and always approach disputes methodically with both firmness and composure. Beyond the immediate community, the incident highlighted a broader truth about the delicate balance of power in neighborhoods governed by HOAs or informal social hierarchies. Rules are necessary, but they are tools, not weapons. They must be enforced fairly and transparently, otherwise they become instruments of intimidation. The ordeal had forced everyone involved, the HOA, neighbors, and even the wider community observing from afar, to confront this reality. Karen's downfall served as a stark reminder that authority must be exercised responsibly, and that unchecked obsession, no matter how small it appears at first, can have wide-reaching consequences. As for us, the victory was both practical and symbolic. Our property was restored, the car cover replaced, and security measures reinforced, but the deeper impact was psychological. We had reclaimed our sense of agency, proving that fear and intimidation could be confronted without succumbing to anger or rash decisions. There was a renewed sense of confidence in standing up for what is right, balanced with a humility born from the realization of how precarious ordinary life can become when confronted by obsessive neighbors. Months later, the neighborhood had adjusted. Karen and her son maintained a lower profile. Their influence was reduced.
The HOA had taken steps to prevent similar escalations in the future, including clearer guidelines for dispute resolution and stricter oversight to prevent personal vendettas from interfering with community standards. And our family? We thrived. Mornings on the porch became moments of reflection and gratitude. Children played without fear. Conversations with neighbors were genuine, untainted by past tensions. Peace, once so fragile, had been restored, and it felt stronger for having been fought for. The story of that fire, the confrontation, and the weeks of harassment became a shared memory in the community, a narrative that reminded everyone of the importance of vigilance, preparation, and ethical behavior. It reinforced that no one is above accountability, and that even the most powerful figures in a small neighborhood are ultimately bound by fairness and law. It also reminded us all that empathy and reason are stronger than fear and obsession, and that communities are healthier when disputes are handled transparently rather than punitively. Reflecting on the experience, a single thought crystallized. Power and authority are not measured by the ability to intimidate, but by the ability to act fairly, responsibly, and with respect for others. Karen had learned this lesson the hard way, and the rest of the neighborhood would not soon forget it. We too had learned that vigilance, patience, and careful planning could transform a harrowing situation into a story of resilience and triumph. And so life continued. The street remained quiet, not from fear, but from understanding. Our family thrived, neighbors engaged constructively, and the HOA functioned more transparently. The fire that once symbolized chaos became, in hindsight, a turning point, a dramatic moment that exposed injustice, prompted accountability, and ultimately led to a stronger, safer community. In the end, the takeaway is clear. Never underestimate the power of preparation, documentation, and steadfast resolve when confronting petty tyranny. Even the most obsessive, controlling forces can be held accountable when approached strategically. Communities can heal, balance can be restored, and peace can be reclaimed, but only if individuals are willing to act wisely, firmly, and with unwavering integrity.